very gently begin inhabiting your body. By inhabiting, I simply mean that it's quite obvious, each one of us, we've been moving around quite a lot over the past few hours. And even if your body has been quite stationary, maybe not the mind. The mind, it has its own way of moving into the past and into the future and into all the plans. So basically, we're just spending this first few moments just slowing down. And just like a bucket of water that's been moved around, you might initially stop moving the bucket, the container. And in this case, the container is our body. And so notice how your body has settled down. It started settling down. But how the contents that the water contained within the bucket, a little bit like the mind and the movement that our particular buckets, our containers have been through. There's been the whole weekend. There's been the morning. There's been many different things happening, including conversations, lots of fun things. Maybe some things that haven't been that much fun either. And all of those have contributed to the movement of the mind. That water that we're referring to, that's still rocking away a little bit. There are still ripples. There's still movement. It hasn't quite settled down. And sometimes it never does. And our practice here, let's just remind ourselves that our practice, we're not here to force the mind to go still. We're not here to force the contents of the bucket to immediately become still so that we can see the reflection of the sky and whatever's above the bucket. But what you might notice is just the mind slowing down a little. By the time this practice ends, so if it's moving at the speed of a high-speed Ferrari right now, might slow down to a slow Ferrari by the time this practice ends, but it usually feels uncomfortable when we identify ourselves as the mind. And when we identify ourselves as the mind, the fast Ferrari feels uncomfortable, and sometimes even the slow Ferrari feels uncomfortable because of the way in which it travels into the past, into the future, into the plans, into the chatter. And right at the outset, we make a presumption that instead of attempting to slam on the brakes of this vehicle, instead of attempting to force the mind to stop suddenly, which can be quite uncomfortable, and you know that when you're in a car or a vehicle or a train and the brakes suddenly slam, the momentum, it feels very uncomfortable, and if without a seat belt, without safety precautions, you could get very hurt, depending on how fast the mind is traveling. But this is a practice where it doesn't matter how fast the mind is traveling, because you start off with that presumption that the mind is a separate entity, and then instead of attempting to hit the brakes, we simply step outside of this vehicle and observe it. You can, if you like, visualize a car moving. Initially, being inside its cabin, where the world is whizzing by, different faces, different places. But the cabin, you see the windscreen. And if you're on public transport, you see the other passengers, you see the various landmarks all whizzing past. You see the windows. You notice the space within this cabin. The seats that you find yourself on. And then you breathe in. And this breath is going to magically transfer you into the space outside of this vehicle so that you may observe it. From a space very much like where you find yourself right now, your body, grounded into this present moment. And let's begin by just tuning ourselves into one of the anchors that will help us to become the observer, our breath. And so begin tuning into the flow of air entering and leaving your nostrils. Nothing overly complicated, just the sensations, the temperature, let's just focus, let's simplify it even more, just the temperature of the breath in. How indicative is it of the temperature in the spaces that we find ourselves in? Notice the surfaces around the nostrils, within the nasal passage, where this air brushes against as it enters. Which nasal passage are you using today, right now? Are you using the right passage or the left passage? For me, I seem to be using my right. Begin to acknowledge how this changes in cycles. Half an hour, 45 minutes, it changes from one passage to the other. And so that's something new. How deep into the nasal passage can you experience your breath flowing in? And notice what the mind is doing right now. For some of us, you might even hear that familiar voice from the mind saying, I've heard these words before. I've done this practice before. I want something new. I'm bored. I know what the breath is. I know what the breath feels like. And we observe even this chatter as we bring ourselves back to the sensations that we're experiencing at this moment. And if you like, you can have a little dialogue with the mind sometimes and just even notice how all through our life we've accumulated information. We've accumulated our degrees, we've accumulated our qualifications, we've accumulated information from our parents, our teachers, the magazines that we read, the books that we're interested in, and sometimes the books that have been forced onto us. We've accumulated a huge amount of information. And all of that information is inside of that car, inside of that cabin. And we remind ourselves that this practice is unlike anything we have ever done before, unlike any of those other activities that we have ever indulged in, because this is a practice where we shift our identification from all that we know into all that we do not. We shift our identification towards ignorance, not knowing, the starting point. I don't know. And in this space, outside of that tiny cabin that is the car, where you find yourself seated here, where your breath has brought you to this space called the present moment, where your breath is bringing you to, where you are arriving on these chairs, on these cushions, on these seats. There is everything else. If you're a more visual person, then this is where the fields are. The forests and the rivers and the lakes and the oceans and the sky. Everything that was outside of that little cabin. And we bring ourselves back to our breath. just reminding us that we have always been here. As we shift our identification from that which we believed to be the world that we knew, into this space where everything is new, where we invoke that quality called our beginner's mind, where we begin to discover for the first time what it's like to breathe. And we step outside of all of those memories, those concepts of what we believe even our breath should feel like, and into the experience of what it actually feels like at this moment. Breath in, breath out, every breath unfolding for the first time. Because there is no time in the present moment. Always the first breath in. Always the only breath out. You might wish to attach words because the mind likes labels and words. A label such as deliciously breathing. Breathing in as deeply as you can. Finding the capacity of your lungs, and then taking in a little bit more. Releasing as slowly and as gently as is comfortable for you. Experiencing the outflow of breath with its temperature and its humidity levels, and the new and different surfaces upon which it brushes against, how it reaches down the upper lip. Continuing to breathe in this slightly unusual rhythm and pace, breathing in as deeply, exhaling as slowly. Grounding yourself onto this in your visualization where you've stepped outside of your car. You could be seated on a field where this tiny little track runs through with that even smaller car with its little cabin, where you feel the breeze brushing against your skin, where you feel the warm sunlight on your skin. You hear the rustling of leaves as the wind blows through them. And you develop the ability to observe the mind as that separate entity. And now suddenly it no longer matters what speed the mind is traveling at. For we are beginning to taste the silence and the space around the thoughts. Which is what this practice is about. Simply developing new relationships with the mind. One where we can observe, one where we can listen. You will hear voices, you will hear tires screeching and all of that. Its engine. You will see many different images. But you are the observer. And that little bubble moves. That's what it looks like, a little bubble. But something magical happens when we observe it. The little bubble, it begins to pop as we touch it with this needle called awareness. And when it pops, we begin to experience glimpses into this present moment, into the stillness of the mind, until another car pops up. And some of these cars, they look very nice, very tempting. They attempt to tempt us into dialogues. If it's a car you like, if it's a story that you find intriguing and interesting, conversations begin, and you find yourself in the bubble, in the cockpit, once again driving the car, completely forgetting where you truly are. That witnessing presence. And if it's a horrible car that you really dislike, a thought that's upsetting, or maybe even a sound, you can hear a sound that you don't like around you right now, that's annoying you, disturbing your practice. Liken that to one of those really polluting cars which are making all sorts of horrible noises, and you begin to believe that you need to get this car off the road. It should have failed its MOT. It's not road safe. And you begin a campaign trying to get rid of it, and that in itself begins a whole new process of dialogues. Then you find yourself inside of the car, arguing with its driver, trying to get it grounded, until you become aware that this has happened. And awareness, we liken it to the needle of awareness, which once again pops the bubble, and yet another glimpse of silence and stillness and being and presence and the present moment, where you're sitting here in the warm sunshine or grass or wherever it is, or exactly where you're seated right now, in front of your computer, in the room that you find yourself in, sitting, breathing, and that's it. That's the fact. Everything else is a story. What this or that person said to you, what happened to you, or what you think is going to happen to you, all a part of the story. Right now, You're either sitting or lying down, and breathing. Let's explore this a little bit further. Still retaining that quality called a beginner's mind. Letting go of all past practices, even those memories of what it means to be seated, what it means to be lying down, and begin exploring for the first time, almost as though we were arriving into this body for the first time, curious as to what it means to be seated. Let your eyes be closed so that you may experience this, not through your sense of sight, but through your sense of touch. Activating the different... Initially, let's just begin with those parts of the body that are in contact with our own body. Like noticing where your arms are resting. Notice the flesh and the skin upon which your arms are resting. Notice how the surface underneath it cushions your arms. Notice the weight of your arms and your hands. Notice what skin feels like. If you can feel skin upon skin. Noticing which surfaces underneath your body are in contact with the chairs or the cushions or the mats underneath you. Notice how that surface supports your body. Notice the exchange, how both your body and that surface, of course if it's a soft surface, how it molds to the shape of your body, how it cushions you. Notice which parts of your body require balance in order to retain this posture that you have adopted. And even if you were lying down, there would be some support. Your neck would be supported in a certain way. Certain parts of your head might be supported. And if you're seated, if there is a backrest to your chair, or if you're on a cushion, how balance takes place, how effortlessly it feels, how there doesn't appear to be anything you actually need to actively do. Observing, and if you like, you could even step outside of your body so that you may observe it from the space around you. And if you like, I'll help you by simply ringing the bell, so that I'll ring the bell a few times so that each time you can allow your form to dissolve, so that you can step outside of it. Feel the lightness that comes with releasing this form. Not for too long, but just for a few moments, observing it from outside. like you can feel the light on your skin. And then your skin merging into the light. Each bell dissolving it, merging the two into one. Which isn't too difficult if you look at it from a scientific point of view, simply because the light entering in through our windows is a form of energy, atoms, molecules. Our body is made up of atoms and molecules, but both vibrating at different frequencies. And now merging into a single formless space, so that you now become a little bit more spacious, inhabiting the corners of your room, underneath the furniture, and even within the grains of wood, which are also made up of atoms and molecules. And then breathing in this new form. And as you exhale, releasing anything you don't think you need right now. We don't need everything that happened prior to this moment. So as you exhale, release all of that. All of that information that we accumulated. What's right, what's wrong, what's left, what's right. And breathe in newness. Breathe in that which we do not yet know. Exhaling, what do we know? We know this form has a name. My body was given a name. Your body was given a name at some point. So we release that name. And if we've released the name has accumulated a lot of baggage. Some of it good, some of it bad, but then it's only the mind that judges good and bad. So let us step outside of judgments and simply release all of it. Breathing in newness as deeply as you can, cradling your breath within. And as you exhale, releasing any of those things that you've always wanted to release. Fears, anxieties, worries, concerns. Because right now you're safe. You're seated here, you're breathing. You are. Feel it. Feel the surface underneath you, feel your skin. Notice how your body isn't moving very much. Notice how your eyelids are shut even though you're fully awake. So this is a very special moment. Breathing in newness. And with the name comes bank accounts and property and all of that, which we compare ourselves against, specifically to others. Let's just assume that our survival is guaranteed. Our survival is guaranteed. And we know that for a fact because we're sitting here breathing. We are. Now, surviving like our neighbors, surviving like others we read about, now maybe that causes a bit of unhappiness, a bit of a struggle, whether it's having relationships of a certain type or accumulations or properties, on being in neighborhoods of a certain status. And if we are releasing the form, why don't we release all of that and just be here now, sitting and breathing, and so exhaling and releasing. And there we have it. We're surviving just by sitting and breathing. The world fades into the background along with the form, as we find we no longer need to compare ourselves against any other standard, which could only exist in time. Sitting and breathing. And breathing in newness, because we all have habits, thoughts we've continued to repeatedly think over and over again, and we sometimes think they control us. And why don't we, it's like those New Year's resolutions, big things we want to start on January the 1st. We want to begin with the absence of those habits. But instead of focusing on the habits, let's just breathe in newness, lightness, and as we exhale, release names, forms, patterns, because they're all connected to the form, they're all connected to the name. Some of these labels have even been given to us by doctors. Depression, the sufferer of this or that illness. And if we step outside of the form, we're not pushing against it. We're simply allowing the bubble to pop. Aware through this needle of awareness, which bursts those little bubbles. What happens when the bubble bursts? It merges into this space, doesn't it? Where we are right now, where we've always been, this present moment, sitting and breathing. If the mind has started to wander, expand those indicators that you are sitting here, breathing. We've already explored our breath. We've explored some of the surfaces of our body, especially those that are in contact with other surfaces. Now what about the rest of the body? Feel your awareness expanding throughout your skin. And of course, there's many different areas. There's some parts of the body that are covered in clothing. And so you feel the clothing resting on your skin. You feel the weight of the fabric. You might feel its texture. But something you will certainly feel is the very thin layer of warm air trapped underneath the fabric, between the fabric and the skin. How that warm layer of air is cradled how it keeps our bodies a little bit warmer than those exposed areas of skin, which brings us to the face, the ears, perhaps parts of the scalp, the neck, especially the back of the neck, maybe some other areas of exposed skin, interacting with the atoms and molecules of the space around us. Can you feel your body seated? Can you notice yourself thinking? Can you notice yourself reliving an event in the past? Or can you notice yourself anticipating something in the future, an experience, an event? The key to it is noticing. And through this process of observation, just taking note of some of the qualities within the mind, the qualities of the mind, how it's always either preoccupied with the past or the future and very rarely aligned into the present moment, which is where this practice becomes relevant, because we've been exploring our doorways into the present moment. We've been exploring our sense of touch, not only around our body, but within our nasal passage. And these doorways, they invite the mind to leave its past. They invite the mind to leave its future and align with the skin. And this is how we discover what warmth is, what the fabric feels like, comfort, discomfort. So it doesn't matter, there's nothing good or bad. Even if you're wearing the most uncomfortable fabric right now, just noticing it, it brings your mind into the present moment, where it leaves some of those stories, both good stories and bad stories, because the mind, they're all connected. One moment it might be the most fabulous story which makes you smile and grin, and then so long as we're identified with the mind, it could suddenly take a turn to the left or to the right or to a different direction and go into a completely unanticipated area, which could bring a frown or a groan or even a cheer. And so this is a practice where we don't get too sucked into that journey, but simply observe it from this space. We've got to know our mind a little bit better today, through experience. Nothing to remember, nothing to memorize, just through experience, a process of observing, practice, the key word. Sometimes many of us think we're failing in this practice because we find ourselves in the bubble more than we would like, carried away by this thought and that thought. But just remind yourself, the key word is practice, and how as a little child, I don't think most of us remember, but when we first learned how to eat, the food wound up everywhere, all around our faces, on the table, on the floor, and we practiced. We practiced, and the muscles began to learn how to coordinate themselves. Finally, the food went perfectly into the mouth. Same thing with walking, talking. Almost everything we've done in the past was practiced. We stumbled, we fell, we tripped, but we picked ourselves up. We learned balance, our muscles strengthened themselves, and now it's effortless. Walking, running, moving around. It began as a practice. And so if you can see yourself as an ageless being, or perhaps one that is just born at every moment, the frustration fades away into the distance. And we begin to understand how we were never meant to be perfect. At least not immediately. Perhaps never, but that doesn't matter, because in the present moment, the future, that too fades away. And all that matters is sitting, breathing. And of course, later on, you might be walking. You might be preparing your food. You might be doing anything that you normally do. But that's where you are. Bringing yourself back to your doorways into the present moment. But how do you work? How do you function? How do you communicate with people from this space? But many of the teachers talk about this space being the space of wisdom, of kindness, of understanding, of an infinite amount of patience, because patience is no longer required in the present moment. And so all of those functions that we consider to be our normal day-to-day functions, they begin emanating from this space of understanding and wisdom and knowledge beyond that which we have accumulated. New solutions we may never have tried or even considered before. New directions, new, all new. I'll ring the bell now so that we'll have an opportunity to readjust our postures, stretch, have a sip of water, bring a drop of kindness to our bodies, our doorways into the present moment. Let's just cement our practice with a short visualization, just helping us to very playfully understand our relationship with our mind. Let's bring ourselves to that image of the mountain. Not that, but this. Create an image of a mountain within your mind's eye, noticing some of its qualities. It has too many qualities, an infinite amount of qualities. So we'll begin with those that are most obvious. How this mountain, it is very unique. No other mountain like it. How it is steady, how it is anchored and appears grounded. How just like us, it is in a constant, or even though it appears to be unchanging, there are changes occurring deep within its crust. Because we know that everything in this world of matter is undergoing change. And then we merge our bodies into this image, with our heads becoming its peak, with our shoulders, our chests and our backs, our stomachs, our feet, our legs, which are in contact with the surfaces underneath us, becoming the sides and the base of this great mountain. Lowering our center of gravity into the seats and the chairs and the flooring underneath us. Feeling the stability, yet still feeling the very subtle movements, which we embrace. And then the changes, which is the obvious changes all around us, at all times, the soundscape that surrounds us. We've all got different sounds around us. Even the cells within our body, new ones being generated, old ones disappearing. The breathing process, the exchange of air, and even more changes in the form of daylight turning into night, clouds, weather patterns, the shapes, the sizes of the clouds, representing our thoughts, all of the emotions that we are experiencing at this moment. Sitting, breathing, reminding and grounding ourselves so that we anchor ourselves as this great rock of awareness, as all of these thoughts and emotions are allowed to flow past us. Sometimes the clouds becoming so thick that we might be fooled into believing that they have the ability to carry us. But then bringing ourselves back to any of the tools that we have used in today's practice. Our breath, our skin, our sense of hearing, even our sight, that remind us that we are here anchored in this present moment. And then allowing the clouds to move. Shifting our attention from the clouds to the gaps in between the clouds. Enjoying the gaps when they appear. Enjoying the clouds when they pass. Around us, through us. The joy of knowing the separation between us, this mountain, and all that is moving around us. Just stay with this, even when you hear the final bell. Because this is a practice where that doesn't really end. Because even as you move into your new segment after this final bell, whether it's work, relationships, conversations, through experience, we have experienced ourselves as the mountain. And the practice begins by simply acknowledging that we will imagine ourselves to be the clouds. Not once, not twice, over and over again, but that's how we grow. But remembering that we now have the tools with which to experience these clouds in a completely different and new way. Now for the final